Rendering is not the final step to 3D graphics. The render is often vastly improved with the help of color grading and compositing. While each of these topics could be their own YouTube channels, I wanted this video to kind of just cover the basics, the key ingredients, so that way you have the tools you need to get started on both. Follow along with your own Blender scene, or you can use the Lone Monk demo file, which I will be using. It's free on Blender's website. I'll link it in the description. Now, one disclaimer, while one of Blender's big features in Blender 4 is a fully supported real-time compositor, I've decided to not use it. Firstly, not all of our render passes are supported in cycles with the real-time compositor, namely the depth pass, which I'll be using for one of the effects. And two, rendering with the 3D View Plus compositor can be too heavy for some users. So for the viewers with lower-end computers that are watching, I'm going to be rendering first and then doing the compositing after. But if you are using the real-time compositor, feel free to follow along. Just know that there are going to be some slight changes. And while this tutorial is built for beginners, I will show you two products I'm affiliated with that will speed up this workflow as well. So stay tuned and watch for that. So if you're using the real-time compositor, you just select the rendered view up here, set the compositor to always or camera. Let me lay down some ground rules of things you should do prior to rendering if you are going to do the render first and then compositing after. Firstly, for the passes, we will use the depth pass. So the Z or depth pass just saves the actual distance, whereas mist takes that min and max distance and normalizes it to 0 and 1. Now, if you ever want to tweak the mist pass, you can go to your camera. I'll enable it here so it's visible. I don't know why this file decided to hide it. So you go to the viewport display, make sure mist is checked, and so you can see the lines. And then in the world properties right here, there is a panel for the mist pass, and you can adjust what those min and max values are. In this case, I think my file is 45, and then you could do like 5 if you want. I like the flexibility of just using the Z pass, but it's not available with cycles in the real-time compositor. If you're using the real-time compositor, I believe the mist pass works. So the next things you need to do is check your clipping. So I'm going to do rendered here, and then for the performance panel, there is now a new compositor sub-panel drop-down right here, and you can set the device to GPU. So that's important to do if you're wanting to use the compositor with the GPU acceleration. Then the color management, we're going to check the false color. You want to limit the clipped black and white values. With this render, it's kind of a hard one because it's darkness and really bright areas in this scene. So it goes to a thermal-like set of hues. So blues are dark, grays and green are kind of midtones, then orange and red are the highlights. And black is supposed to be like just pure black. There's no information at all. Whereas with white it's completely white. There's no information that's going to be useful in the compositor. So the point is to try to limit that as much as possible. And so that can be done with adding more lights, shifting the exposure as I just did, which we will be able to do in the compositing stage as well. But yeah, so the point is to try to limit these little black spots and these white spots as much as possible. You may not be able to get all of them, but as long as your main composition is just in those middle ranges, or at least not black or white, then you should be fine. And with that, let's render. And we're back. And we're back. And so I actually had kept it set on false color, but that's fine. That's not an issue. And so up here, there's these workspace tabs. We're going to go to the compositing workspace. Now, so this is the default setup where it kind of has the node tree in front of your render. I'm going to actually change up the workspace a little bit, just that way I get more flexibility. In this case, I'm not worrying about animation. You may, but I'm going to make this big and then split it. You can just click and drag and make a new window and set it to the image editor. Now, the reason I want to do that is because with here, you can't really zoom or pan. You can kind of do that with this side panel in the view section. You can move things and things like that, but you don't really get that flexibility of being able to go in, zoom, check specific spots and things like that. So I'm going to actually use the viewer node here and then disable the backdrop. So it kind of leaves this a lot cleaner. I'm going to actually expand this, but you can do this however you want. If you do want to do animation, you can also add the timeline right here. This kind of gives a more like Nuke interface. If you're familiar with Nuke, this is kind of the setup I prefer. So the first thing we're going to do is change the color space. I'm going to actually hide this render layer. So there's a little eye icon on some of the nodes. You can just hide that to hide them. So with here, some people worry that with the color space settings that it's baked into the render. It's not, because you can just set it to whatever you want here. Because the render always renders raw, but then the view transform is transforming the colors for the screen and for when you save the image. So don't worry about changing this after you render. And we're going to actually change it to raw. And fun fact, raw can sometimes speed up the rendering of your image just a tiny bit, especially with large resolutions. I probably should have said that before. Before you rendered, I apologize. And so you're wondering, why would we keep this in raw? Because we're going to add the color space within the compositor. And make sure you check use nodes if it's not already. And to add nodes, you can use this add menu for the compositor, and this has all of them. You can search by just typing here. You can also use Shift A to bring up the menu, and you can go through the menus, or you can just search. So if I search color space, we can add that and then drag it in. And so with this, we're going to change the from. We're going to keep as is. This probably will change depending on your monitor, the from, but in this case, we're just using 709. But then the to, we change to whatever color space we want based on the display device as well. So I'm on sRGB, and so we can change it to Chronos, we can change it to AGX, whatever you want. But why we're doing this? So that way we can do operations before the color space. You may be wondering, why would I ever want to do an operation before the color space? Let me demonstrate. So let's add a new node, do exposure, set this to something large like 4. Now when you see this, it's overexposed, of course, but it still looks right. It looks what an overexposed image of this should be. But let me add it to afterwards. So I'm going to mute this with the M key, and then I'm going to duplicate it, Shift D, bring it over here, and then I unmute it. Oh, what's going on here? Why does it look so bad? Because the color space is changing the dynamic range of the image. Before the convert color space, we have the full raw data of the render, and it's a huge dynamic range. With the color space, then it's converting and toning it down to a standard dynamic range. So if we're doing the exposure before, then we're working with this big dynamic range and shifting and manipulating however we want, and then doing the conversion. Whereas if we do the conversion first, then the exposure is only working with this very small range, and it looks worse. This is an important thing to keep in mind, that some operations you may want to do after, and some of them you may want to do before. Depends on if you need the full dynamic range, and sometimes if you want like specific colors, specific values, sometimes it's easier to just do that effect after the color space conversion. That's something to keep in mind when you're compositing. So I'm going to delete this, re-enable this. What do I want my exposure set to? I think the default for the demo file is -2, which is pretty balanced. I kind of like seeing more of the scene though, of the interior. So I'm gonna set this to 1. Let's add some fog. And now with the fog, we're going to use a color balance node. Set it here, and I'm actually going to use an example just so you can see how this node works, because we're going to use this a few times. So do the gradient texture. Textures are now available in Blender 4.5. I'm really excited with that. So I'm going to use the offset power slope formula. It tends to work better with more dynamic ranges. And so if you're wanting to preview different things, you can Control-Shift-Click different nodes. You can click one. If you click a node multiple times, it cycles through the sockets, or you can click a specific socket as well. And with Blender 4.5, you can also assign shortcuts to each one. So the viewer node, I can do Control-1, and that assigns the 1 key to that viewer. And if I do Control-Shift here, and then do Control-2, now with these 2 nodes, I can toggle between them, right? So you can use any of the number keys, whatever you want. Now we have the waveform here. So let me show you what each of these do. So the offset kind of just shifts the colors globally. So it just says like move it up, move it down all together. And then the slope changes the slope of the brightness. Now you can see if I offset, so the slope is just affecting the slope or stretching and compressing of that dynamic range. Revert this, you can revert with the backspace. And then with the power, this is a mathematical power, that's what that's representing. is it's kind of working like gamma, if you ever worked with that, but it kind of brings down or brings up the midtones without changing the darkest and brightest points. This is a good way of working with that. So now you understand the basics of what this node's doing. Then I bring in here, and then for the fog, we're just going to be using an offset. That's not really good fog. So we're going to use the depth pass to factor in the fog, so it gets foggier as we go farther out. Now I could just plug it directly into the factor. However, factor is expecting 0 and 1. And because everything is beyond 1 meter of distance, it's just putting it everywhere. We're going to map this depth to a 0 and 1. And that's the benefit of the mist pass, and it should already have this for you. But for the depth pass, we're going to add a map range node. So with map range node, I'll preview this really quick. And so if you increase this maximum, you can see the range of your depth increasing. Oh, look at that. That's so satisfying. If you don't know the maximum distance of your image, you can just mute this. If you just right click over the image editor, you can color pick values. And so I believe this goes up to 43 somewhere. Anyway, I know it goes to 43, but it's going to be different for your render. So I'm going to go 44. This is good. I don't want the fog to start immediately inside. I want to give a little bit of darkness on the foreground. So I'm going to add the min to start at 5 meters. And so then everything below that is just 0. So it's looking pretty good. You can see some aliasing with these chains back here. And that's because the depth pass only does one sample. And so you get these really aliased jagged edges. If you want to handle that, you can either add a anti-aliasing node, or I'll use a blur node. At least with my test with this image, it actually worked better. But I'm just going to add just a couple to it. In that case, it kind of evens it out. And so with this, just having a white fog is kind of not that interesting, but we can do an offset with a color as well. I'm going to actually, let me kind of like that orange on this. So we do something like that. So you're going to get this nice little fog. And to tone it down, we just have to change the max factor 1 to just something lower. 5, and we'll do lower, 0.25. And so we have our viewer here with 1. Let me duplicate this, plug in the exposure here, add its own viewer, assign 2. So that way now we can kind of do a before and after really quick with just the number keys. And you have to have your cursor over the compositor for that to work. But look at that. Just a little bit of fog makes such a good difference. All right, so that's our fog. We could just throw these into a group node, especially in the adjusting stage. I kind of like to have all my nodes visible. So we're actually not going to use the node group. We're going to actually frame these nodes. They've always had the frame node, but they made a shortcut for it that's a lot more intuitive, and that's the F key, F for frame. So we'll do fog. And now we have this organized frame that we can drag around while still being able to adjust things directly. And next we can do glare. So I'm going to move these a little bit more. We're going to just move the glare to right before the color space. So I'll add a glare node, and behold the sun. And so this is one of those things that there's actually multiple types of glare. There's bloom that you're probably most familiar with, ghosts, which is kind of like a less articulated version of a lens flare. Bloom is the most popular one, so I'll just do that. And the important thing, we're going to preview the highlights here, because we want to adjust the threshold, because the threshold decides what brightness of pixel determines whether it becomes used with the glare or not. Having all of this is kind of too much. So we're going to have it only be these bright areas that are directly hit by the sun and reflecting into the camera. So I'm going to increase this. We'll change the bloom to high quality as well. Oh yeah, that looks great. Now, if you want to add multiple glare nodes, then add a add mix node. Some of these operations, there's going to be multiple that match. We want the mix add, and this will be for color. So just use that. Glare, and so then we will plug that in. And now we can have this extra factor of how much we want to add to it. So that's really nice to be able to utilize. Move this some more. We'll do another add, and then to duplicate with the inputs, we're going to Control-Shift-D. And that keeps the threshold as well, since we duplicated. Plug the glare in, and then we're going to change this to ghosts for this case. This one I'll actually tone down a little bit, just so it's not as bright. And so that's our glare. So let's frame these. Glare. You see these shortcuts at the bottom left. If I hold down Control, there's an option to cut links for reference. There's also Shift and right click, and that'll add a reroute, which kind of just joins the links together. So that way you can have it be clear of like, it's just one input used 3 times. Next is lens distortion. This one will let you actually decide whether you want it before or after the color space. And so we do lens distortion node, and I'll just add it for reference here. So you can do dispersion like this. There's also barrel as well, barrel distortion. So I'll turn that off. So you can kind of see that it works a little differently before and after. So there's this bright blue, bright orange in this case, whereas with AGX, before the AGX conversion, it's kind of a little bit desaturated, but most lenses are pretty good at mitigating this, like they intentionally mitigate lens distortion and things like that. And so if you do use it, unless you're going for a lens that intentionally follows this high distortion, like try to be very, very subtle with these. So like I'm going to go really small, like do 0.05. So that gives a kind of very slight distortion and aberration. This is actually a great way of removing the CG look. Now let's add some digital noise or film grain. They're not the same thing. Don't tell a film person that they're the same thing. But thankfully, now with Blender 4.5, there is a set of textures now. You can use the same textures like you would in the shader. So we're going to use the white noise. If you want to do the digital noise, you go by that. If you want to do film grain, we can do something with Voronoi. Now, disclaimer, these are not accurate film grain or noise. If you want accurate film grain, use a professional software or compositor that has it built in. Render Raw add-on actually has this, probably one of the best film grains I've seen within Blender. Again, link in the description for that add-on. This is more of just a quick enough, good enough, close enough solution, okay? Just so I can decide between them, I'm gonna add a switch node. You can even decide which socket they plug into. So off and on. So that way I can just decide which one I want to use just with a simple toggle. And then we're going to add a add node like we did before with the color, mix color add, not the math ones. Technically it's all the same node. You just change the data type. Then you just change that to what you want and do that. But they are listed separately in the search engine. So I'll remove this. And that looks horrible. And that's because not only is it too intense, the noise should only really be affecting the shadows. With highlights and developed areas, this really shouldn't be doing anything. So we want to factor the image's brightness into the factor. So with the image, I'm going to separate the color. So this sets to RGB, but we're going to change it to, I'm going to zoom in, the Y's and L and V are the main ones we're going to be looking at. I don't actually know the mathematical difference between them if they're calculated differently. I think V and L are the same, but the lightness, we'll plug that into the factor and it works the exact opposite. So we actually want to invert it. Now we could use the map range node like we did earlier. I'm going to use the float curve. This is actually one of my favorite new nodes. It works just like RGB curves, but just for one value. And I love it because you can not only invert things, I can also change the interpolation of it. And for this, obviously this is still like maximum intensity in the shadows. We can just tone that down with a math multiply node. And most phones have their own denoising, or otherwise most professional cameras handle noise well. So this should always be very, very minimal. Do 0.1, even 0.1 still kind of feels strong. And then let's check the film grain as well. So this is way too big, so we'll make the scale a lot bigger. And film grain, at least when film grain in images tend to be more monochromatic, we could do RGB to BW. And for some reason it doesn't come up in the search. That might be a bug, but it's in the color and at the very bottom. So this just changes it to black and white, but tries to keep the perceptual brightness the same, as you can kind of see. Pretty good. Let's group these together. Noise or grain. Oh, and then if you want animated noise, you'll notice if I change the frames with the arrow keys, nothing happens. If we want to make it more animated, we can change these to 4D, the dimension option. And then if you just have one of these, you can type the field in directly, but I'm going to add a value node and plug it into both W sockets. Now, instead of typing in a number, we're going to do hashtag or pound, depending on how old you are, frame. That way you can have animated noise. Alrighty, let's do a before after. Oh, that looks great. I think that looks great. All right, now we're going to get into color grading, what we've been all waiting for. I'm going to move this. We're going to put our color grading in between fog and glare. You can also put some of these after the convert color space. It's completely up to you. And then I'm going to duplicate this color bounce, and you can use the F key while grabbing or duplicating to detach. I'm going to reset this offset. And now let's look at the widgets that we were looking at before. So this is the scope, so you can click the arrow or the N key, and there's the histogram. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you've probably used this before. It's 0 to 1 in brightness and how many pixels are in that brightness. So there's more shadow pixels than midtones. So with the waveform, it's a little bit different, but I find it superbly useful. It's the horizontal position of the pixels, so like left to right matches, and then that pixel's brightness. So you can actually see the pillars drop the brightness right here. You can see right there. So with the vector scope, it's kind of like your render on a color wheel. So you can see the hues. It's kind of flipped to what Blender's normal color wheel is. You can see like there's markers for red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. These are kind of target colors. So if you want like the ideal red, then that is where you'd want to put your red pixels to go, or yellow. This isn't like a hard goal to have. It's just if that's what you need, then you want to make sure you go to that. There's also the sample line. So if you want to sample just a specific area, you can do that. If you want to cancel it, I couldn't figure this out for the life of me earlier. You sample and then you just press escape, and that'll just keep that line from appearing there. And then the samples, you can decide how many samples you want, because it's not going to sample the entire image for these just for the sake of performance. But if you want more, you can increase it. So I'm going to change it to 50. So that gives us a little more information to work with. So if you're doing real-time compositing, you're probably wondering like, man, if I only could use the vector scope and the histogram in my 3D viewport while I'm color grading, with this add-on, you can. So basically all it does is just adds the vector scope and the histogram to your 3D view. You can move them around, you can adjust things, and it's all done in the viewport. So if you're a big real-time compositor, this is the add-on for that. And with render raw, it's like two halves, make a whole big explosion, something like that. Point is, yeah, you can like move the overlays around. It's real time. I would highly recommend this add-on. This is something I've been waiting for. Yeah, buddy, that's what I've been waiting for. Yeah, so I have an affiliate link for that and the render raw add-on, link in the description. Highly recommend both. Now, something I'd recommend when color grading, you turn off your lens distortion and your noise. If you look at this waveform, when I disable the noise, that clears it up so much. You see that? It kind of makes it way clearer. And so you can kind of get a more accurate reading to the original values if you do that. So if you want to bring up the shadows or even make them darker, you can change the slope. You can change the gamma as well. And because this is before the glare, it's going to affect how the glare is used as well. So keep that in mind. I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit. I'm going to have a 0.05, but then I'm going to add some blue. Up here. Obviously, I can't really see it on here. I could go like this and then turn it back down. So it kind of gives a slight blue tint. So if I turn it off, it's really subtle. And then if you want to change specific hues in saturation, then you can use the hue correct node. And this allows you to adjust hue saturation value of things based on the hues. For example, like with this grass, maybe I kind of want to get rid of the green and make it a little more sepia. So I can shift the hues down. So I could do that. If I want to bring out the maybe the blues in the sky, maybe I could do something like this. So I'm gonna let me turn that down a little bit, or I can bring out the orange. That's way too much orange. You can kind of see when it clips, and so if I bring it down a lot, you can kind of see there's that shape. But as I bring it up higher, it kind of just stops right there. So that's something to keep in mind when you're using this, is because the color space conversion is after, and it may still clip your values. So you have to be careful of how the color space is affecting that hue correction. Just kind of bring out those sepia tones a little bit. But yeah, I like that color a lot more. And if we bring the lens distortion and noise back. All right, and then the last effect we're gonna do is the vignette. So I'm gonna move this, give us some more space. We're gonna put this after the color space right before the digital noise. There is a way of doing this with the ellipse mask node, but I'm gonna use one that's a little more adaptable for use. That way, regardless of your aspect ratio, it should still work. So there's a few math nodes. We're gonna do the image coordinates. And so we're gonna use the normalized socket. If you ever worked with UVs, basically just looks like a UV map. And then we want to get the distance of these. So we're going to use the length vector math node. So you can kind of see what we're doing. We're trying to, 0 to 1 from the center to the edge, but the problem is it's starting at the corner. We can offset it by adding to it. In this, we're actually going to use the vector math add. You may be tempted to do 0.5, but it actually moves it the opposite direction. So we're going to do negative 0.5. Now it's in the center. And then with that, all you have to do is add another color balance node. So we want to kind of compress that dynamic range to 0, right? So we only want to do that to the outer edges. And all we have to do is plug it into the factor. And so we'll give ourselves a little more room because we're going to add one more node to give us more control, and that is the float curves. Again, you could still use a map range. Nothing's stopping you there. Bring in the vignette a little bit tighter if you want. And then we also want to try to keep the center area untouched. And so we're going to bring it in like this. You'll notice it can kind of go brighter when you don't really want it to. That's because these are extrapolating. So this is saying go beyond 1 or go beyond 0. And so we fix that by using a clamp node. So that will just force it back to 0 and 1, ensures that nothing's going to get messed with. So you can do something like this where it's a little more contrast and just at the edges. So do before and after. Yeah, okay, I like that. And then frame this for vignette. But yeah, so that is our color grading. And so if you made it this far and you're thinking, man, if only I could do this without a bunch of nodes. First of all, thank you for getting to the end. And second, there's an add-on that does just the opposite of doing all this compositing without nodes. So let me show you that really quick. It is integrated with the color management. So you just check render raw. It'll take a second, and obviously my CPU is throttled while recording. So in this case, it handles that raw conversion for you under the hood. So I'll just change this to AGX. And then, so if I wanted to make the equivalent, so I can even color boost as well if I want. Oh, that's way too strong. You can color boost. It's like a vibrance if you've ever used that. But then I can do also the lens distortion here, and then glare. Obviously, it's way too high. And so you can do all these things really quickly. You can even animate with just a checkbox. So it basically converts a lot of what we did to sliders and checkboxes. If you want this kind of more slimmed down sliders only workflow, I would highly recommend this add-on. I've used this for over a year now, maybe even a couple years now. I really love the add-on. It has made this compositing workflow much more streamlined. I'll have an affiliate link in the description again. And that is compositing and color grading in Blender. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It's been a long time coming. For those that are aware with the summer sale, so this is the last day for discounts on my add-ons, as well as some wallpapers on my Ko-Fi and Patreon. For the course, CG Cookie has actually been kind enough to give me more of a commission for the end of this month and next month. So I'm going to have them keep the coupon up, and it's just going to be on the product page. I'll link the course in the description. If you've ever wanted to script your own add-ons, this is the perfect course to get you started. Link in the description. With that, happy color grading, compositing, and blending.